The Pitts chapter describes an unusual event. Just prior to the collapse of the building at 5:52 p.m. a jet of flames was pushed from windows in the same area. The event that caused this unusual behavior has not been identified. Very heavy smoke was visible rising from near the northwest corner. Suddenly, several pulses of jet flames several stories high were pushed out of one of a window near 1354B on the 13th floor. These pulses continued for about 6 seconds. The amount of smoke on the face increased dramatically at the same time. This is the only time that this unusual behavior was observed for WTC7. Similar behaviors observed during the fire in the WTC towers were attributed to internal pressure pulses generated by events such as local collapses within the buildings. Since the time for this particular event is unknown, it is not possible to associate it to a known event within WTC7. Did we miss something? There is no known event within WTC7, isn't it? So let's look at this unusual event step by step. The pulses of jet flames were pushed out of one single window. The fire was several stories high, but it didn't extend horizontally on its way from the source to the window. For the last 5 hours no fire was observed on any floor above the 13th floor. And the pulses continued for about 6 seconds. Similar behaviors observed in the WTC towers were attributed to local collapses within the buildings. First of all, any local collapse of the 13th floor and below should have caused a suction on the 13th floor and maybe dust and overpressure on lower floors. Secondly, a local collapse above the 14th floor would raise some serious questions, but maybe there was a local collapse on the 14th floor. The 13th floor had a slab-to-slab spacing of 12 feet 9 inches. The 14th floor would fall for about 0.89 seconds onto the 13th floor, but the pulses continued for about 8 seconds. Thirdly, if several parts of the 14th floor collapsed in a serial manner, the collapse could have generated pulses of overpressure for 8 seconds or more. And maybe a distant single collapse of a very large area may also have generated a wind lasting for about 8 seconds, but the overpressure would have expanded and the shape of the collapsing area similar to waves on the water surface. Insofar it seems to be impossible that a local collapse on the 14th floor generated 8 seconds overpressure on the 13th floor hitting only one window. Of course, a collapse due to fire should have opened more than one window due to heat. Fourthly, as we saw earlier, we need some kind of pancaking for at least 5 floors downwards, because otherwise the vertical columns wouldn't collapse at a steel temperature of about 150 degrees Celsius. If a local collapse of the 14th floor had caused a local collapse of the 13th floor, then the overpressure conditions behind the particular window had lasted for about 0.9 seconds. Thereafter, the local collapse of the 13th floor would have sucked the flames and the smoke back into the window. Fifthly, according to Pitts, very heavy smoke was visible rising from near the northwest corner. The amount of smoke on the face increased dramatically at the same time. But that smoke wasn't rising from the windows on the 13th or 12th or 11th floor. It was rising from a lower level and probably the ground level. The same smoke was visible rising during the collapse. The amount of the same smoke also increased dramatically around 4:51 p.m. and disappeared 1 minute later for at least the next 10 minutes. Of course, similar behaviors observed in the WTC towers were attributed to jet fuel fireballs in the lobby of the North Tower 95 stories below the damage and 10 seconds after the impact, despite the fact that the fuel needed at least 1 minute to rain down the shafts, even if the overpressure of the jet fuel explosion above the 90th floor pushed unburned vapor down the shafts to the 77th floor. Similar behaviors observed in the WTC towers were attributed to burning cars. So far the confidential and predecisional document raises a lot of questions about the heat that ignited the cars, about the early fires that doesn't spread, about the superheating of the lateral bracing, about the dramatically increasing and disappearing smoke, and finally at least one unusual event prior to an unusual collapse.